Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for our financial aid webinar. We are excited to share a little bit more about the financial aid process here at Georgia Tech. And so without further ado, I want to introduce Katie Conrad, our Executive Director for Scholarships and Financial Aid, to share a little bit more about the process. So thank you again for joining.
Well, thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. Let's get started with the presentation. So this evening, we're going to talk about all things financial aid. We're going to cover the categories of financial aid, the different types of aid, and the sources of financial aid, where that funding is going to come from. We'll talk about COA, or the cost of attendance. We'll talk about the Student Aid Index, or the SAI, which is the number that comes from completing the FAFSA. We will talk about what it means to have financial need and what that calculation is. Of course, we'll go over the process for applying with the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA. The College Board's CSS profile, which is another application that Georgia Tech requires to apply for financial aid, for need-based financial aid. And we'll also cover some specific Georgia grants and scholarships that are available to Georgia residents. That won't be a huge part of the presentation because I do know that we have people from out of state joining us tonight too. So let's talk about the different kinds of financial aid. Financial aid consists of all of the funding that's available for students and parents to help pay for the college expenses. And it comes in two different forms. We have gift aid and self-help aid. Gift aid is going to be the free money, your scholarships and grants, and those are things that don't have to be repaid. There's also self-help aid. And this comes in the form of federal student loans, private loans, and work study or student employment. So the first type of need-based financial aid is grants. So there are federal grants that are available, and that is the federal Pell Grant and the Federal Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant, or FSEOG. There are also grants that are available through the institution. So Georgia Tech does have a variety of need-based grants that are available to students who apply for financial aid and qualify. The other type of gift aid is scholarships, and scholarships are often only going to be a merit-based scholarship. However, there are some scholarships that are both merit-based and need-based. They come from a variety of sources: private scholarships, and this is your foundations, businesses, churches, charitable organizations, organizations within your community. Also state scholarships. Here in Georgia, we have the Hope Scholarship and the Zell Miller Scholarship, and also the HERO program. Institutional would be the funds that are coming, the scholarships that would be coming from the institution where you attend. So Georgia Tech does have scholarships that are based on merit and also based on a combination of merit and need. The first type of self-help aid is the Federal Work Study Program. And it provides part-time employment to students who have demonstrated financial need. And this also encourages community service and work within the student's course of study, so something related to what you're studying in college. These funds are limited. We are provided an amount, an allocation from the federal government each year. So once those funds are exhausted, we don't have any more to give. But it says to apply early. You definitely want to make sure you have all of your financial aid applications completed by that January 31st deadline. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. The next type of self-help aid is the Federal Student Loan Program. There are three different kinds of federal loans. There's the subsidized loan, unsubsidized, and the Parent Plus loan. The subsidized and unsubsidized are student loans that are borrowed in the student's name. The subsidized loan is need-based, and it has an interest rate this year of 6.53%. And the word subsidized meaning that the government is subsidizing the interest while the student is enrolled in school. So it's an interest-free loan while you're enrolled. The interest does begin to accrue after you've graduated or if you've dropped below half-time enrollment status. An unsubsidized loan is not based on financial need. It does have the same interest rate as the subsidized loan. The interest on this loan does begin to accrue after it is dispersed to the student account. You are able to make payments on the interest while you're enrolled in school. If you're not making interest payments on the loan, the interest is capitalized when you graduate and added to the principal of the loan. The Federal Parent Plus loan is a loan that's borrowed in the parent's name. It's based on credit worthiness, and so you do have to apply and be approved to borrow this loan. It has a 9.08% interest rate, and the parent is able to borrow up to the total cost of attendance. And I'll tell you a little bit more about what cost of attendance means in a moment. In the federal student loan program, there is a limit to what you can borrow each year and also an aggregate limit, so a lifetime limit that you can borrow in the federal student loan program. So you can see on that first line, a first-year student, if you have enough financial need, you can borrow up to $3,500 in a subsidized loan, and then an additional unsubsidized loan of $2,000. So for the total loan eligibility for a first-year student is $5,500. It does increase by $1,000 for each year you're enrolled in school. The aggregate limit that you can borrow in the loan programs for a dependent student is $23,000 in the subsidized loan and another $8,000 in the unsubsidized loan program. So I mentioned on the PLUS loan that the parent could borrow up to the total cost of attendance. So what does that mean? It is an estimation of the cost that we expect for a student to encounter when they're enrolled in school. There are direct costs and indirect costs. So let's talk about the direct costs. These are the things that are going to be billed to your student account, items that you're going to pay for at the institution. So that would be tuition and fees. And if you're living on campus and eating in the dining hall or have a food plan, it would be the housing and food. And then, of course, books and course materials and things that you need for your classes. Indirect costs are transportation, getting to and from the campus or getting to and from home if you're living on campus. And then also personal or miscellaneous expenses, those other expenses that you're going to encounter, like being able to purchase clothing, being able to do laundry, because that's also important when you get to college. So remember that there are direct costs and then there are indirect costs when we're talking about the total costs of attendance. The next key term I want to talk about is the Student Aid Index, or SAI. And this is the index, the number that is used or that is calculated based on the information that you provide on the FAFSA. It is not the amount of money that you have to pay to go to college, and it's also not the amount of money that you will receive in federal student aid. It truly is just an index that the school uses to calculate the amount of federal student aid that you're eligible to receive. So when we talk about types of financial, types of financial aid being need-based, this is the calculation that we're talking about. So you take that total cost of attendance, so your direct costs and the indirect costs, and you subtract the student aid index, that number that comes from the FAFSA, and that is what determines financial need. So if a student shows financial need in this calculation, they would qualify for things that we're referring to as need-based aid. So So how do we get to that point? You do have to complete the FAFSA, or the Free Application for Federal Student Aid. The application for 2025-26 opened on December 1st. In subsequent years, it's going to open on October 1st. It was delayed again this year, but next year it'll be available on October 1st. It does use prior tax data. So for the 25-26 FAFSA, it's going to be collecting 2023 tax information. You do want to make sure that you complete your applications on time. That is what ensures your maximum eligibility for the limited sources of funding that we have in some of the federal aid programs and the institutional aid programs that we have at Georgia Tech. Our deadline to apply for financial aid at Georgia Tech is January 31st. So you just have a few weeks left to make sure that you have everything completed on time. This little note at the bottom, we always get several questions about this, so we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end, I think. But if you're applying for summer 2025 admission, you should complete also the 24-25 FAFSA in addition to the 25-26 FAFSA. Both applications are currently available, and you would be able to complete both of them now. So where do you go to actually complete the FAFSA? The website that you're going to use for all things federal student aid is studentaid.gov. And this blue box that you see here is a screenshot of what you will see when you get to that page and click on filling out a FAFSA. You can see that the 25-26 FAFSA is now available. There's also another box a little bit farther down that you don't see on this screen that says if you need to complete a 24-25 FAFSA. They both show up on the same screen. If you have not started the process yet, you would go to that far bottom left corner to say start a FAFSA, and you log in to start. In order to sign the FAFSA and to log in and start the process, the student has to have a Federal Student Aid ID, or an FSA ID. And this is basically your electronic signature. It allows you to log into the website and sign all of the documentation for your application. And if you decide that you're going to borrow federal student loans, it's also the signature to sign the promissory note for the federal student loan. So it's very important, and you will be able to use that same Federal Student Aid ID for all of your years of college applying for financial aid. Each contributor to the FAFSA, so whoever has to supply their information on the student's FAFSA, will also have to have an FSA ID. So this includes the student, parents, and if the student is married, the spouse, and if you have a situation where it's a divorced family and remarried, the spouse of the parent would also need to have their own FSA ID if they're required to be a contributor on the FAFSA. This is what allows federal student aid to link up with the IRS for the direct data exchange to pull in your income information. So to create the FSA ID, the student needs to have a social security number. You'll have to have your date of birth, the full legal name, and this is really important. A lot of times we go by our nickname. So if I were completing or applying for my FSA ID, I go by Katie. That's how I was introduced, but my name is actually Catherine. So I would have to use my full legal name in order to do the FSA ID. It's very important. You have to have your home address, telephone number, and an email address. You'll set up a username and a password, and then of course answer those challenge questions that we're all used to, and those are really important for when you will ultimately lose your FSA ID and your password, and you'll have to answer those challenge questions. Parents and spouses who don't have a social security number are still able to create an FSA ID. One of the questions when setting up that FSA ID is, do you have a social security number? And if the answer is no, you just check that box and you have to provide a little bit more information, but you'll still be able to create an FSA ID if you are a contributor to a student's FAFSA. I mentioned that there's an electronic data exchange with the IRS, and this is what allows the IRS to supply directly to the FAFSA your federal tax information. What this allows us to do is not have to manually enter tax information into the form, which really simplifies the process. The IRS authenticates your identity with a valid social security number, and it allows us to know that the information is directly from the IRS, so we're not having to collect documentation and copies of your federal tax return. It's a really slick, simple process this year. Okay, moving on to the College Board's CSS profile. And this is the second application that we are that you're required to do as a first-year student at Georgia Tech applying for need-based financial aid. Students who are only applying for either the Hope and Zell Miller Scholarship in Georgia, or if you're only wanting to apply for federal funds, you're not required to do this. However, I would encourage all students applying for financial aid to also complete the CSS profile. This is what allows us to consider you for any need-based institutional funding from Georgia Tech. You can see the website of how to get to the application. And when you get there, you'll see this purple box on the screen, and you'll do sign in to the Fall 25-26 profile to begin the application process. The CSS profile is a more robust application, honestly, and it takes a little bit more time and a little bit more documentation than the FAFSA. So you will need to be able to create the username and password to sign in and create your new account. You'll want Georgia Tech's CSS code, which is 5248. You don't necessarily have to have that. There is a search feature once you get into the application. You want to have copies of your 2023 federal tax return, your 2023 W-2 forms, and all other records of that year's income, as well as records of any untaxed income and benefits if that applies to you. You'll want information on your assets and bank statements. There is a $25 application fee to submit the CSS profile, but that fee is automatically waived by the College Board for AGI, adjusted gross income, up to $100,000. So that's an automatic waiver if you qualify. It's not something that Georgia Tech can provide. It just happens automatically when you're submitting the application. Scholarships at Georgia Tech. We do have a variety of scholarships that are either merit-based or need-based or a combination of the two. The Stamps President's Scholarship is a scholarship available that's based on merit. We have the Gold Scholarship, the Provost Scholarship, which is only available for out-of-state students, the Dean's Scholarship that's available through the different colleges, the Hope and Zell Miller Scholarship, which is our state scholarship program for Georgia residents. The Stamps Scholarship and the Gold Scholarship are available for in-state students and out-of-state students. So it's only specified either out-of-state or Georgia resident only if it applies just to that population. We also have need-based scholarships. We have the Tech Promise Scholarship. This is available only to Georgia residents with high financial need. The Val South Scholarship, which is also available only to Georgia residents, and it is a merit and need-based combination. And then we have a variety of institutional scholarships and grants that are available based on financial need. And if you want more information about all of these programs, we have the website listed at the bottom of the screen. But honestly, if you just Google Georgia Tech financial aid and you click on the scholarship tab of the website, you'll be able to find all of this information as well. Okay, so for our Georgia residents on the webinar, let's talk a bit about these two scholarship programs, the Hope Scholar and the Zell Miller Scholarship. So the Hope Scholar program is available to students who graduate from an eligible high school with at least a 3.0 GPA. You have to meet the Georgia residency requirement and meet the Hope U.S. citizenship or eligible non-citizenship requirement. You have to be enrolled as a degree-seeking student and be registered for selective service if required. So even if you are 17 years old right now and you're not able to register for selective service if you're male, at the time you turn 18, you are required to register for selective service to be eligible for Hope or the Zell Miller Scholarship. So Zell Miller, you have to graduate from an eligible high school with at least a 3.7 GPA and receive at least a 1200 SAT or a 25 ACT on a single administration of either of those exams. Or you have to graduate from an eligible high school as a valedictorian or salutatorian with at least a 3.0 GPA. And I made this important note at the bottom of the screen. We often have students say, I don't really want to apply for need-based financial aid. I'm not going to complete the FAFSA. I know I'm not going to qualify. How do I apply for my Zell Miller scholarship? We always encourage all students to at least complete the FAFSA once, just to see what you may qualify for. Completing the FAFSA and the CSS profile allows us to see if we can offer any need-based financial aid. You're not required to do those things to get the Hope or the Zell. You would have to, though, complete the Georgia Student Financial Aid application, which I do have linked here. And it is the state aid application for Georgia residents who only want to be considered for Hope or Zell. That application is good for 10 years, so you would only have to complete that once while you're enrolled. The FAFSA, on the other hand, you have to complete each year. So what does the Zell Miller and Hope Scholarship cover? The Zell Miller Scholarship covers all tuition, and it does not cover any of the fees. For Hope, the 425 academic year, it covers $341.93 per credit hour. This also does not cover any additional fees. To maintain eligibility for the Zell Miller Scholarship, you have to have at least a 3.3 college GPA. And for the Hope Scholar, you have to maintain at least a 3.0 college GPA. We measure that progress at checkpoints, and they occur after you've completed 30 credit hours, or I'm sorry, after you've attempted 30 credit hours, 60 credit hours, and 90 credit hours. And we also measure that after each spring semester. We've talked quite a bit about that January 31st date. So we have some important dates for you to remember besides that one. But let's talk again about what January 31st means. It is the deadline for the Office of Scholarships and Financial Aid at Georgia Tech to receive the Georgia Tech application for financial aid, which is a really simple application, just asks a few simple questions, doesn't collect any income information. The CSS profile and the FAFSA. Those are the applications that you must complete by January 31st for us to evaluate your application for need-based financial aid at Georgia Tech. During March and April, we encourage you to be looking for outside scholarship opportunities. Georgia Tech students bring in a lot of outside scholarships to help pay for their educational expenses. So be looking for those opportunities online and in your community, or if your high school, college counselor is sending you various emails about scholarships you can apply for, be sure to be doing that so you can have some additional funding coming in. Early April, we anticipate that we will be able to provide the financial aid offers so that you can see what you're eligible to receive. And that, of course, is before our May 1st deposit deadline for your admission to Georgia Tech. We won't be able to answer any personal questions in the Q&A, but if you do have additional questions that are of personal nature, you can contact us. We are located at the Bill Moore Student Success Center on the 3rd floor, and our office hours are 8 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. Monday through Friday. You can also email us at finaid@gatech.edu, and you have our telephone number there as well. We have a lot of information available on our website. So a lot of your questions may be answered just by reviewing the information that is out on our website. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and invite Andrew back to help out with some Q&A.
Well, thank you, Katie. I have worked in admission for many years and learned quite a bit from your presentation. So I'm sure everyone logged in tonight has also learned a little bit more overall about financial aid wherever you might be applying to college, but also specifically here in the state of Georgia and more specifically here at Georgia Tech. So I pulled a few questions. There's a lot of questions that have come in. It looks like our team behind the scenes have answered over 50 questions so far, and they are still busy typing. But I pulled a few questions that I thought would be helpful to address and have you answer for the full group. So the first one is, do I need to apply for financial aid before I know my admission decision?
The answer to that is no. You don't have to have your admission decision to apply for financial aid. For students who are applying either regular decision or those who have applied early action 2, so our out-of-state students, I think you probably got an email yesterday letting you know that those admission decisions would be released at the end of the month. January 31st specifically, right, Andrew?
Yep.
Does that date ring a bell to you? Did I just talk about January 31st being the deadline to apply for financial aid? So don't wait until you have an admission decision to complete your financial aid applications. You want to go ahead and get that process started so that you make sure you're meeting that January 31st deadline.
Awesome. Thank you. I always say, although our offices work very closely together, undergraduate admission and scholarships and financial aid, we are very busy both reviewing lots of applications, right? And so, unfortunately, sometimes those dates don't line up perfectly, and sometimes that does mean submitting a financial aid application prior to an admission decision, but it gives us the time to get through the thousands of files that we are all
Yes.
looking at. Thank you. The next one is a FAFSA required for merit-based scholarships?
The answer to that is no. A FAFSA is not required if you're applying or if you're just interested in receiving merit-based scholarships. However, as I said, I always encourage students and parents to consider applying for financial aid. Complete the CSS profile, complete the FAFSA, complete the GT application so that we can at least do the first year evaluation. Beyond that, if you don't qualify for any need-based financial aid, there's nothing that says you have to complete a FAFSA the next year if you don't want to apply for federal financial aid again. But no, to apply for a merit-based scholarship, to receive a merit-based scholarship, you don't have to complete the FAFSA.
So thank you. And sticking on that topic of merit-based scholarships, so no, you don't need to submit a FAFSA. What kind of application, if any, do you need to submit if you want to be considered for merit-based scholarships at Georgia Tech?
Great follow-up to that because I kept saying apply for merit-based scholarships, and you don't have to apply for merit-based scholarships at Georgia Tech. Your application for admission is also your application for scholarship. There is nothing additionally that you have to do. Thank
I
you.
always, I always like to tell students too, and if students ask about the Stamps Presidential Scholarship or the Provost Scholarship. I mean, everyone needs to remember you've already shared quite a bit of information with Georgia Tech when you submitted that admission application on Common App. So that is the information that's utilized for some of our scholarship programs. Okay, next one. Um, I don't know if I'll be admitted for summer. Do I need to complete both FAFSAs before the January 31st deadline?
See, I told you I knew this is always a question, and that slide in the presentation can be a little bit confusing. So currently, if you haven't been admitted yet, and you're waiting on that admission decision, you don't know if it's going to be for summer or you don't know if it's going to be for fall, but you want to meet that deadline of applying for financial aid by January 31st. You really only need to complete the 25-26 FAFSA to be considered an on-time financial aid applicant. The important thing to remember, though, is that there is a hard federal deadline to complete the 24-25 FAFSA, which is June 30th of 25. So no, you don't have to do it before January 31st to be considered on time, but there is a hard deadline of June 30th to complete that application for the summer term.
And that deadline would be after students are already on campus started. So
Exactly.
typically, if people, I can add a little bit more from the admission side, and students who are do enroll over the summer, whether it's for a program like our Ignite program, for example, typically will move on to campus and join the Georgia Tech community in mid to late June. So you'll definitely, once you know, either if you're admitted to the summer term or if you decide to join Georgia Tech in the summer, which I always encourage students to consider. It's a great way to kind of get a jump start on your Georgia Tech education. It's a great way to get comfortable on campus, comfortable in classes. And so if you do, after you receive your admission decision, if you are admitted, students who are admitted to the fall are more than welcome to start and change their start term to the summer. And so when you make that change, kind of that next step, I would say, would be to go ahead and get that FAFSA on file as well. And that will all kind of be happening over the course of April and May to ensure that you are ready to go when those summer classes start in late June. So. Awesome. Well, it does look like there's some more questions, and I can see our team is typing away right now. Katie, want to give you the opportunity. Any other thoughts, any other recommendations or advice that you would like to give everyone who's joined us tonight or might watch this video at a later date?
Well, the only thing that I want to stress at this point is the January 31st financial aid deadline. And that is the deadline for us to consider you for any need-based Georgia Tech financial aid. In the event that you miss that deadline and you still want to apply for federal aid, you can still complete a FAFSA after that date. You just won't be considered for any need-based aid through Georgia Tech. So that important distinction that you can still complete a FAFSA after that. It's just you won't be eligible for any need-based aid through Georgia Tech.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Katie. Want to wrap up and also just remind everyone on that last slide, Katie shared some contact information. Easiest way to find that information is finaid.gatech.edu. You'll see all of that information and know that both the Office of Undergraduate Admission and the Office of Scholarships and Financial Aid are here to help you through this process. A lot of, I would say, some of the more basic questions our admission team can help you, but definitely as you're working through those applications over the next couple of weeks leading up to that January 31st deadline, our team in the Office of Scholarships and Financial Aid are here and ready to help answer your questions and support you through that. So feel free to reach out should you run into any roadblocks, have questions, and we look forward to seeing all those applications come on in for that January 31st deadline. So thank you all for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording at this point. And